I already took your name off the house. My fiancé stopped smiling the second I said it. We were sitting inside the title office 30 minutes before closing, with contracts spread across the table and the escrow officer staring between us like she'd just witnessed a car crash. Ethan had spent 6 months pushing me to put him on the deed, even though the entire down payment came from my late mother's inheritance. Every time I questioned it, he told me, "That's what marriage is, trust." But an hour earlier, I found a document he never meant for me to see. Not wedding paperwork, not mortgage paperwork. A private agreement that guaranteed he'd still own half the house if we split up. Then the escrow officer cleared her throat, looked directly at Ethan, and said, "Sir, there's also an issue with the financial disclosures you submitted this morning." And that's when I realized this was bigger than the house. Ethan blinked hard, like his brain was trying to catch up to 3 different disasters at once. First, his name wasn't on the property anymore. Second, I had clearly seen the agreement hidden inside his leather folder. And now the escrow officer was looking at him like she suddenly didn't trust him either. "What disclosures?" he asked, too quickly. His voice had changed, just slightly. But after 2 years together, I noticed things like that. The charm was slipping. The escrow officer adjusted her glasses and glanced down at her screen. "There are outstanding liabilities connected to your business filings that weren't included in this morning's paperwork." I watched Ethan's jaw tighten. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "Seriously? Right now?" he said, leaning back in his chair like this was all some annoying misunderstanding. "Can we not do this in the middle of closing?" The room went painfully quiet. I could hear the air conditioner humming above us, papers shifting somewhere behind the front desk. My own heartbeat pounding in my ears, because suddenly every weird moment from the last few months started rearranging itself in my head. The rush timeline. Him insisting we skip hiring separate attorneys. The way he kept saying, once this house closes, everything gets easier. Not better, easier. 3 nights earlier, I'd asked him why he was pushing so hard to close before the wedding. He kissed my forehead and told me I worried too much. Then last night happened. I got up around midnight for water and saw light under his office door. Ethan slammed his laptop halfway shut the second I walked in, but not before I saw a message pop up on the screen. From someone named Darren. "Once your name's on the property, you're covered." Covered from what? At the time, I told myself I was overthinking. By 6 the next morning, I was sitting in my car outside the title office, calling the attorney before Ethan even woke up. And now, sitting across from him, watching the color slowly drain from his face, I realized something terrifying. He still thought he was in control. Then Ethan slowly turned toward me and lowered his voice. "What exactly did you tell them, Maya? What exactly did you tell them, Maya?" The way he said my name made my stomach tighten. Not angry, not yet. Controlled. Like he was trying to figure out how much damage had already been done. I kept my voice steady. Nothing that wasn't true. For a second, Ethan just stared at me. Then, almost instantly, the smile came back, like someone flipping a switch. He turned toward the escrow officer again. "I think we're all getting a little overwhelmed here. Wedding stress, house stress," he laughed softly. "You know how it is." Except now the performance felt obvious. And once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. The way he kept interrupting whenever finances came up. The way he answered questions directed at me. The way he rested his hand on the back of my chair, not affectionately but possessively. A year ago, I probably would have defended him. Back then, Ethan felt safe. I met him 4 months after my mom died. I was exhausted, grieving, trying to manage her estate while selling her old house. Ethan stepped into my life at exactly the right moment. He brought groceries over without asking, helped me pack boxes, called me every night just to make sure I wasn't alone. And slowly, without me noticing, he became part of every major decision I made, including this house. The escrow officer excused herself to print revised paperwork, leaving the two of us alone at the conference table. Ethan leaned closer immediately. "You embarrassed me in there," he said quietly. I stared at him. "I embarrassed you? You changed legal documents behind my back. You tried to sneak ownership protections into paperwork I'd never seen." His expression hardened for half a second before smoothing out again. "That agreement protected both of us." "No," I said. "It protected you." His eyes narrowed. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen so fast he probably thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. "Darren." Ethan stood up immediately. "I need to take this." He walked out into the hallway, lowering his voice the second he answered. Something in me snapped. I stood up quietly and followed him toward the lobby entrance. And just before I reached the corner, I heard him say, "No, she still doesn't know. Once this closes, I'll handle the rest." My chest went cold. The floor suddenly didn't feel stable anymore. Then Ethan turned and saw me standing there. He froze completely. Before I could speak, he slowly slid his phone into his pocket and smiled. "How long have you been standing there?" Ethan's smile stayed perfectly in place, but his eyes looked different now. Sharp, measuring. I forced myself to shrug. "I came to see if you wanted coffee." For one long second, neither of us moved. Then he nodded slowly. "You should have said something. I just got here." Another pause. It felt like we were both waiting for the other person to blink first. Finally, Ethan opened the lobby door for me like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just heard him talking about me behind my back during our home closing. When we sat back down at the conference table, I couldn't focus on anything the escrow officer was saying. My mind kept replaying that sentence. "Once this closes, I'll handle the rest." Handle what? I looked over at Ethan. Calm, relaxed, scrolling through emails like he didn't have a care in the world. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. He wasn't nervous because he thought he'd already won. While the escrow officer organized documents, I quietly opened my phone beneath the table and searched Ethan's full name. At first, nothing unusual came up. Business pages, old networking profiles, engagement photos we'd posted months ago. Then I saw another name attached to his, a woman named Rachel Mercer. My stomach tightened as I clicked. 3 years earlier, Ethan had been engaged before me. I'd never even heard her name. I kept scrolling. And then I found the lawsuit. Civil dispute, joint property ownership, financial misconduct allegations, filed by Rachel Mercer. My pulse started hammering. The details were partially sealed, but one sentence stood out immediately. Plaintiff alleges intentional concealment of debt exposure prior to shared property acquisition. I stopped breathing for a second. This wasn't random. This had happened before. Across the table, Ethan looked up suddenly and caught me staring at him. "What?" he asked lightly. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Leah. I texted her 20 minutes earlier asking if she could discreetly check Ethan's business records. Her reply was only one sentence. "Maya, his company is drowning in debt." I felt physically sick, not because he lied, because I finally understood why he needed the house. Then Ethan reached into his leather folder, pulled out a sealed packet of papers, and placed them directly in front of me. "We should probably sign this too before closing," he said casually. I looked down at the title page, Post-Marital Property Agreement, and my blood ran cold. "Ethan, what is this?" I already knew the answer before he spoke, but I needed to hear him say it. He leaned back in his chair like this was completely normal. It's just additional protection. Standard stuff. It doesn't look standard. I flipped through the pages faster now, my hands shaking. Every paragraph said the same thing in different legal language. If the marriage ended, Ethan would still retain partial ownership rights to the property regardless of who paid for it, regardless of contribution, regardless of separation circumstances. And buried halfway down the third page was the part that made my chest tighten. The agreement would survive divorce proceedings and limit challenges to ownership claims. This wasn't protection, it was insulation. For him. The escrow officer shifted uncomfortably across the table. Mr. Cole, was this agreement reviewed independently by counsel? Ethan answered before I could even open my mouth. We didn't think separate attorneys were necessary. Didn't. Like the decision had already been made for me. I looked at him carefully now, really carefully, and suddenly every conversation from the last 6 months sounded different in my head. Don't overcomplicate things. You worry too much. If you trust me, this shouldn't matter. None of it had been reassurance. It had been pressure. Ethan noticed my expression changing and leaned closer, lowering his voice enough that only I could hear him. Maya, don't do this here. Do what? Make this emotional. I almost laughed at the absurdity of that sentence. My mother's inheritance was funding the entire purchase. My credit qualified us, my savings covered closing costs, and somehow I was the emotional one for hesitating to hand over half the house. I quietly closed the packet. When were you planning to show me this? I asked. His jaw tightened slightly. Today. 30 minutes before signing? That's still before signing. The calmness in his voice scared me more than if he'd yelled, because this wasn't impulsive. This was planned. Carefully. Then Ethan's expression hardened completely for the first time all day. You're acting like this house exists without me, he said quietly. You wouldn't even qualify emotionally to handle something like this alone. I stared at him, and there it was. Not love. Not partnership. Control. Ethan glanced toward the paperwork on the table and smirked slightly. Relax, he said. In 2 hours, half that house is legally mine anyway. I looked him directly in the eye and finally said the one thing he never saw coming. No, Ethan, I said calmly. It isn't. For the first time since I met him, Ethan looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? I reached into my bag, pulled out the revised ownership paperwork, and slid it across the table. The escrow officer didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Ethan grabbed the documents, scanned the first page, then the second. His face lost color so fast it honestly scared me. Only one owner was listed. Mine. No, he said immediately. No, this isn't right. It is, I replied. He looked up at the escrow officer. When was this changed? This morning, she said carefully. This morning? His voice cracked slightly. Without notifying me? Her expression stayed professional, but colder now. The property was purchased solely with Miss Reynolds' funds. She had the legal authority to amend the vesting structure before final execution. Ethan turned toward me so fast, his chair scraped across the floor. You went behind my back. The irony of hearing that from him almost made me laugh. You tried to trap me into signing a property agreement you hid until the last minute. That agreement was normal. No, I said. It wasn't. The room went quiet again. And suddenly, without the confidence, Ethan looked different. Smaller. Like the version of him I'd been engaged to only existed as long as he controlled the situation. He stood up abruptly. We should talk privately. I don't think there's anything left to discuss. His composure cracked instantly. After months of calm explanations and reassuring smiles, I finally saw what happened when he lost leverage. You're seriously doing this right now? He snapped. After everything I've done for you? The escrow officer lowered her eyes toward the table. Even she looked uncomfortable now. I stood slowly. What exactly did you do for me, Ethan? He opened his mouth and stopped. Because for the first time, there wasn't an easy answer. Not one that explained the hidden agreement. Not one that explained the debts. Not one that explained Darren. Not one that explained the lawsuit from his ex-fiancé. The silence exposed him more than any argument could. Then he made the mistake that confirmed everything. This would have protected us both from what's coming, he muttered. My stomach dropped. What's coming? Ethan immediately realized he'd said too much, but it was already over. Leah called me less than 2 hours later with the rest of the truth. Ethan's business wasn't struggling. It was collapsing. Multiple creditors were preparing legal action against him. Accounts were delinquent. Loans were defaulting. And if his name had been attached to the house, the situation could have turned into a legal nightmare. The house wasn't about building a future together. It was about shielding himself before everything crashed. And Rachel, his ex-fiancée, had gone through almost the exact same thing. Shared property pressure, last-minute legal documents, hidden financial problems. Only she found out after signing. I found out 30 minutes before. By the end of the week, the engagement was over. A few mutual friends stopped speaking to him after they learned what happened. Others admitted they'd always felt something was off, but didn't want to interfere. And Ethan? The charming version disappeared completely once there was nothing left to gain. 3 weeks later, I moved into the house alone. The first night felt unbearably quiet. No wedding planning, no late-night conversations. No pretending everything was perfect. Just silence. But standing in the kitchen, holding the keys my mother's inheritance had paid for, I realized something that still gives me chills. If I had ignored that feeling for even one more day, the house would have never truly been mine.